The housing crisis is a global phenomenon. Paris, London, New York, they all share the same headline. Living in city centres is a luxury for the lucky few. But there is one exception, and not a small one. The largest city in the world. Tokyo, a megacity with 14 million inhabitants and a metropolitan area of 40 million. So many people live in Tokyo that we could fit entire populations like those of Spain or Canada into it. And the curious thing is this: instead of being a real estate hell, Tokyo is famous for having affordable housing. To give you an idea, between 2007 and 2022, housing prices in Tokyo only rose by about 20%. To put that into perspective, that's what can happen in New York or Madrid in just 1 year. The result is that, right now, both housing and, above all, rents in Tokyo are cheaper than virtually any other major city, whether it be New York, Barcelona, Singapore, Paris, Stockholm, Madrid, or London. Tokyo is a very, very unusual case. In relatively central neighborhoods of this megacity, you could rent a one-bedroom apartment for around 500 or 600 euros. Yeah, you heard that correctly. A price that in London or New York sounds more like fiction than reality. Of course, there are also expensive areas, as there are everywhere. And now that interest rates in Japan are starting to rise after years of being stuck at 0%, some analysts fear a possible correction in prices. Because the truth is that in Tokyo, as we'll see in a moment, there is a lot of housing on offer. So much so that some believe that current prices, even though they seem low, could be above market value. In other words, Tokyo is not only more affordable, it could become even more so. Now at this point, many of you may be thinking the same thing. There must be a catch. Surely it's all due to Japan's aging population and the fact that the country is losing people. If there's no demand, prices go down. Basic logic, right? Well, no, this time that's not the correct answer. Yes, Japan as a country is losing population, but Tokyo is not. Tokyo continues to grow. Not wildly, but it is growing, and according to forecasts, its population will not begin to decline until at least 2050. And that's not all. In recent years, Tokyo has experienced a real tourism boom. Hotels, tourist apartments, sky-high demand, and yet prices have not skyrocketed. So no, the key factor is not a lack of demand. In fact, the most striking thing is that this affordable housing is not new. It has been this way for decades. During that time, the city's population has grown strongly. Between 2005 and 2015, for example, almost 1 million people moved to the capital, and prices didn't budge. So the question now is, how has Tokyo managed to have the most affordable housing of any major world capital? Well, there's not just one secret, there are 4, and we're going to take a look at each one in this video. There is a lot of construction in Tokyo. In the 20 years between 1995 and 2015, an average of 155,000 new homes were built in the city each year. Although this trend has slowed slightly in the last 2 years, it has not changed much. In the municipality of Tokyo, a city with 14 million inhabitants, more than 130,000 homes continue to be built each year. Now, how exactly does this stack up? To give you an idea, let's look at what is happening in the community of Madrid, which has 7 million inhabitants. That is roughly half the population of Tokyo. Well, in the community of Madrid, over the last decade, an average of just 10,000 homes have been built per year. Put another way, with practically half the population, only 7.6% of the homes built in the Japanese capital are built in the Spanish one. In other words, to match the Japanese figure in the community of Madrid, new housing construction would have to increase 13-fold. Because as I said before, it's not just Madrid. Routinely, the Japanese megacity builds more new homes each year than the entire state of California. Hold on a minute, that's right, there is a catch here. A lot of new housing is built in Tokyo, but a lot of old housing is also demolished. Buildings, particularly low-rise ones, have an expiration date. In 2023, the last year for which data is available, some 5,000 units were demolished. This meant that the balance was still positive, with almost 125,000 more new homes built in the city. Although the truth is that, in other years, this number has been higher. In general, the ratio is roughly 1 house demolished for every 4 built. This is an extremely high rate that is unmatched internationally. But even making this adjustment, we would still be talking about a growth rate in the number of homes that is 10 times higher than that of the community of Madrid. This is a difference compared to Madrid, and in general compared to all other major international capitals, and it has been this way for a very long time. So what does this graph explain? Look at the different evolution of the total housing stock in major cities since 1970. And so, whilst the total housing stock in Tokyo grows between 1.7% and 2% per year, in Madrid, it grows only by 0.6%. Okay, I think you now understand why the price situation is so different. In Tokyo, construction never stops, and they build more homes than the growing number of households, which means that there is enough supply to renovate properties, accommodate tourist apartments, and even second homes for Japanese people from other parts of the country, and all without affecting prices. In other words, in the Japanese capital, the concept of having to rent rooms because you can't rent entire apartments does not exist. This leads many experts to believe that the reason the city has become such a behemoth is precisely because it's so affordable to live there. That is the true key to its success. On the other hand, we're talking about a large city with homes that have traditionally been known for being very small. So the question is this really the case? Well, yes, in principle it is. Japanese homes tend to be small, especially in large cities, as is to be expected. But even so, the numbers here have also improved in recent decades. Currently, the average size of new homes is around 65 meters square, which is much less than the 80 meters square they had back in the 1990s. But bear in mind that we also have to take into account that, on average, fewer people now live in each household. So the result is that not only has the square footage grown in absolute terms since the beginning of the century, but the space per person is also increasing. Remember that in Tokyo, housing is growing faster than households, which makes it easier for young people to move out of their parents' homes sooner, and means that people don't have to share flats for lack of alternatives. The result, in the long run, this means more square meters per capita, even though apartments remain relatively small. In fact, in this respect, Tokyo is already on par with the world's major cities. As I mentioned earlier, in the Japanese capital, older houses and low-value single-family homes are easily demolished to make way for new developments. And the question is, why is so much being built? Basically, because it can be. In fact, this wasn't always the case. In the 1970s, when large apartment towers began to become popular, there was a certain social backlash against them, and many projects were put on hold. A lot of city councils and civil movements did everything they could to stop the proliferation of these new towers. What's more, there were also some legal changes that slowed down new construction. The result, a shortage soon emerged. Tokyo continued to build a lot, but not enough to meet the sky-high demand, so prices skyrocketed. This, combined with a huge expansion of credit, led to a well-known bubble that eventually burst in 1992. And what do you think the Japanese government did next? How did it deal with this process? Well, basically, it did the opposite of what you might expect. Specifically, this.
To help the economy recover from the bubble, the country relaxed regulations on urban development.
In response to the bursting of the real estate bubble, they looked for ways to make building even easier. It's strange, but that's what they did. Over the next few decades, the national government made changes to make it as easy as possible to build new homes, which brings us directly to the second major feature, or the second major ingredient of this model. Pay attention. Logically, if so much is being built, there must be a reason. Well, one of the main reasons has to do with urban planning regulations. Let me explain. In the United States, and most of Europe, urban planning is based on what is known as Euclidean zoning. With this type of planning, each piece of land is divided according to a specific type of use. This is mostly decided locally. In this way, public plans determine exactly what can be built on a given piece of land and what the construction must be like. This is done in considerable detail, so that ultimately public regulations establish the use of the building, its height, maximum surface area, shape, setback of top floor apartments, and so on and so forth. Everything is perfectly planned and detailed. Yet this is not the case in Tokyo. Here, urban planning is limited to expressly prohibiting what cannot be built, but little else. This means that small apartment buildings can be built almost anywhere. Larger structures are permitted in most cases, and even in areas designated for offices, new homes can be built or converted. If there is demand, go ahead. And naturally, large-scale mixed-use developments are not excluded either. In fact, they are quite common. For example, one of the most well-known features of Japan is Zakyo buildings, which are those famous buildings lit up with coloured lights that we typically see in pictures of the country. These are buildings that tend to be tall and narrow and contain a lot of businesses and services inside. The thing is, they're springing up like mushrooms because they can be built adjacent to residential buildings without requiring any special permits. This makes them a very good alternative for making the most of unattractive or boxed-in plots of land. Sometimes they even have to put elevators on the outside, and although we can see this in other places, the difference here is that they can be built with considerable freedom.
People have the right to use their land, so basically neighbors don't have the right to stop development.
This of course has several advantages. First, obtaining permits to build almost anything you want is much easier and much faster. Second, it allows for much greater optimization of land value. And third, it makes it easier for people to get around on foot and creates a lot of jobs within the neighborhoods themselves. This in itself means that many more centers of activity coexist in the city, rather than just one single center. And in turn, this reduces the premium you have to pay to live closer to that center. This is a factor that is rarely discussed, but which generally also contributes to making housing much more expensive. Incidentally, this brings us directly to the third distinctive feature of the Tokyo model. In general, when we talk about cities, we tend to talk about population density. Well, Tokyo is a dense city, but above all, it's a city with a very high commercial density. As it's easy to set up offices and businesses in practically any space, the city is full of services. And the fact that neighborhoods have so many services, as I mentioned earlier, means that, in a way, there are many different centers of activity, and not just one single area of reference. Therefore, although Tokyo has a well-defined center like any large capital city, it's much less important than in other large cities. But guess what? Possibly, this whole model we're seeing wouldn't be so successful if it weren't for another key factor, the most famous feature of the city and a national emblem, the trains. Our protagonist today is an extremely large city. We're talking about a metropolitan area with as many inhabitants as Canada, Poland, or Ukraine. So as you can imagine, this city is also very extensive. And yet it's very easy and reasonably quick to get around. That is because Tokyo has what is probably the best public transportation system in the world. It's a unique system because in the arteries of this city, we don't find one subway network, but two, and alongside them a formidable train system. The result is a public transportation system so dense that it is rare for anyone to live more than a 10-minute walk from a station. This, along with the intensive use of fast lines and high frequencies, making getting around this huge megalopolis reasonably comfortable and efficient. And naturally, this encourages people to live further from the center, where prices are lower. So once again, the premium for living in the center is much smaller. This is something we can see to some extent in this graph. Take a look. Tokyo is a dense city, but its center is not particularly dense. It's on par with many other large cities. However, it does become much denser as we move toward the outskirts. And behind that density, there is, of course, a huge mass of people who naturally move around thanks to that immense public transport network. It turns out that Tokyo has grown in step with this infrastructure, not the other way around. That is a story for another day. So there you have it, the model that has made it possible, curiously enough, for housing to be affordable, even in relatively central areas of the largest metropolitan area in the world. Of course, it's not all good news. For instance, the city has far fewer green spaces than other major capitals. It has far fewer parks. That is probably the worst aspect of Tokyo. But when it comes to affordable housing, no one in the club of large megacities can beat it. And the question is, why did we want to talk about this topic on Visualeconomik? Well, first of all, because affordable housing is an issue that has been gaining a lot of importance in our cities lately, and sooner or later many of them will start to look at models like this one. This obviously would have major financial implications. Secondly, because in recent years a very special player has emerged in the Japanese capital, REITs, which are investment vehicles focused on the real estate market. And as I've been saying for some time, they have taken on a very special role in Tokyo in recent years. However, we'll be talking about these very unusual companies another day. For now, we just wanted to bring your attention to them. Visualeconomik community, now that we've come this far far, the question is over to you. What do you think of the Tokyo model? What other solutions do you think are needed to reduce housing prices? Leave us your opinions in the comments, and let's see what we can come up with together. And found this video interesting, then please give it a like, and I'll see you in the next episode here on Visualeconomik. All the best. See you soon.